They want to know how long their top leader has been there. They want to know, can you believe it? Lending institution wants to know, does this church follow the leader? You wouldn't think, but they want to know that. That's a part of their hedging of saying, is this a proper investment or not a proper investment? So they want to know what is the nature of relationship. That's why you need to have minutes from your meetings. Catch it? Documentation for what you do. Most cases this day and age, you need to have 7 years of it. Keep it electronically, paper, whichever way you want to go, but you need to have that documentation because they want to look at that and understand what this is all about. Then they want to do the demographics of people who are part of your church. What's the makeup? What's the economic makeup? Not that I got to tell them what everybody's making, because I have no idea what people are making, but being able to put a narrative together, who are making, or who are decision making in X number of dollars, who are people who aren't, and different classification of economic status. Age of your congregation. The most consistent givers are those who are 60 and older. They've been around, they believe in the ministry, they understand what it means to be a faithful steward and give. But the lending institution wants to know, well, who do you have in the younger categories? Because they look at it and say, well, somebody who's 60 or 70, they're only going to be around for a certain number of years. They want to know what the next crop of people who are part of your congregation. So they want to know that kind of issue. Sometimes it's economics, sometimes it's educational level, sometimes it's the particular jobs or industries that are represented in your congregation. They become all a part of the narrative for the financial picture that a lending institution will want to take it and look at in order to make a decision. I recommend that when you put your stuff together, don't settle on one institution. Go after several and let them pipe in. Sometimes a lending institution will say, I just don't have a history of giving to churches. I don't have an aversion to it. It's just that we as a lending institution have no history in doing it. And sometimes they'll propose and say, well, nope, I'm sorry, we can't do it. You need to go to another institution. Sometimes they'll say, well, we can give but so much, but we need to get another lending institution to come alongside this to carry the burden of this here investment or this loan. You've got to make decisions of that, whether or not you want to go that route. My preference is I want one institution. I don't want to be having to interface with two different lending institutions and having, in terms of payback and all the regulations and all that kind of stuff. And so therefore, I have to move away from somebody who doesn't have a history in lending to a church. Some lending institutions do have a history of what it means to lend to a church. Not everybody sitting across that table in that lending institution even goes to a church, let even understands what a church is. So you've got to do some education with them. So that's important. Take the time, get to know them. My banker called me up yesterday saying, Reverend Lloyd, sent me an email. Can we have lunch? We haven't had lunch since COVID hit. And I said, certainly, I will take the time. Let's have lunch. I'm going to sit there and have lunch with them. And I know full well, we're not going to be sitting there talking about this loan. That's not what we're going to be talking. I know what's going to happen is I'm going to be a pastor to him in that moment as we have lunch. Because I want him to understand more and more about who I am in leadership and more about this ministry. In his case, he goes to another church, not even in the community. But he wants to look at, and he reads the newspaper. He understands what the conversation is about so-and-so's reputation in community. And so he's getting firsthand, that. So that we want him at the table to be able to advocate as to why they are to invest in your ministry. And it is an investment. That's one of the things that came out of COVID. The devastation of so many churches that had no relationship to the banking institution. The banking institution didn't know them other than their name and whether or not you paid your money back on time. They need to know you personally. That means you need to invest in that. Invite them to the church. In fact, I say it all the time, saying, oh, no. For us to have a relationship, you at least need to show up and find out where we are in ministry. And quite frankly, Sunday morning worship service, I know you got your own church or no church at all. You need to come up in here because you will get an understanding of what we are about. So that when you're sitting at the table making decisions that affect me, it does in a context that's informed and not just, oh, that's a church on some corner over there. Those are kinds of things that are interpersonal relationships that you want to build. Quite frankly, I have the bank president on my cell phone. He knows me by name. I know him by name. I check in on him, just not outside of any financial interaction, as is to say, how are you doing? What's going on? What is your daughter doing? Oh, they're going off to school. I know that our relationship is going well if he's going to send me an email saying, well, you know, Reverend Lloyd, my daughter is looking for an intern this summer and in the particular area. She's in the first year of college, and can you help out? I'm going to take the time to work that and make sure anywhere in which I can help in that situation, I'm going to do that. That's a part of building relationships with those who are in my financial institutions. Sometimes it's simply saying, let me check in with you, and they're welcome to call. I just want to let you know this is what's happening in ministry right now. The paper and what my reports and giving them copies of things only say but so much. But me to say verbally, this is what's going on. This is my 30th anniversary year, what have you. And build that relationship. One of the things I've done most recently is to say, okay, look, I have a situation where we're going to do a grocery bag program in the community for those that are hungry. This is all during COVID. And my ability to call up my banker and say, look, this is the program. This is what we're looking to do. It involves support in the community, and I need some money from you. Reverend Lloyd, what do you need? I said, this is what I need. I need a larger refrigerator so that the food can go in there. And while we at it, this is how much it costs me to feed X number of families on a given event. And I need you to give me some money for that. And you'd be surprised how willing they are to invest in community. Because remember, they have to invest in community. And they have investment dollars that they have to show that they're investing in community. So those are the kinds of relationships we're talking about when we talk about being and going after money. My attitude is, don't leave any money on the table. In my relationships to various organizations in the community, I make a practice that I do not duplicate what services are being done by somebody else. My role as a church is to be a prophetic voice to hold people accountable at the table. So if you're a social service provider and you're supposed to be taking care of people who need help in a certain area, I'm going to be at the table to remind you to hold your feet to the fire that this is what you're supposed to do. If there's an issue of injustice, then that means I've got to work at that. To say, this cannot work. This is not how that does. That means I got to do my homework. No doubt about it. So if someone sends me a thing, says, Reverend Lloyd, there's a survey. We're trying to determine what the community needs are. Take the time to do the need. Do the survey. It only pays off later down the road when you're saying to somebody, we have a need in this community. It's unmet. How do we get it done? And they're going to look at that, the data that says, oh, the data says that the issue of child care is an issue, or the issue of transportation is an issue. Access to health care is an issue in our community. Those are important times. That's a role we play in church in doing it. As I mentioned, idle duplication. So when we decided that we were buying a property and we decided we're going to move there, renovate it, the church decided that given where our location was, and our understanding of what we call community assessment of needs, we've got to decide what needs we believe as a church we are able and we want to meet, and what needs we are not going to meet. Remember now, I'm not called to meet all the needs that are there. Sometimes I'm brokering other people to meet a particular need. So that means in making that move, made the decision to say, around me, there were at least 7 or 8 programs supporting people with addiction. Well, I didn't need to take it and move to that location and then open up another addiction program. What it meant is that I'm believing, and I'm going to do my homework to check you out, that you're doing the right kind of program you are, and it's quality. You're making a difference. I may support you financially so you can do that program. I may send my parishioners over and they're volunteers in your program. I'm not going to duplicate your program. Now, if for some reason I get to a point where the quality of the ministry is not being offered by them, then we as a church must come back together to say, we believe this is a part of our mission and we are going to do it. But never to the point where I want to duplicate services being done. If anything, I recognize, you'd be surprised, there's money in the community. I don't care what community you're in. There's money out there. And the money has got to be spent. And most people have an obligation to spend it. And you've got to be the one, because you're on the ground. You know the needs. And you articulate to them, this is how I connect up between the money you have and the need that's there. And that's a part of ministry. That's what it is. So that means you ought to take some time to serve on some boards in the community, some organizations in the community. Yes, indeed. So the voice of the church is at the table. And let me be very clear. I never apologize for who I am. I am a representative of the church, and in particular, a representative of the Church of Jesus Christ. I make no apologies for that. I wanted to be very clear for folk. This is who I am, part and parcel. This is what I'm about. It's important that people understand that up front. If you decide, don't want Reverend Lloyd at the table because this is who he is and whatever, that's great. We know that up front. Let's not waste my time. Let's not waste your time. But at the same time, at no point do I want in any kind of decision-making or discussions along the way that somehow you don't understand what I represent and what I am about. And my expectation is that you respect the ministry of the church, just as I respect the ministry or expect the work that this social service agency does, the Framingham Public School does, the police department. I'm going to give you that respect, and I expect the respect to come back from you for the church. There are moments in community when you have to remind folk in community that the church is there, and in fact, if the church does not exist, you really won't have community. You won't have community in the quality that you want. And that's whether they go to your church or not. So I don't make any apologies about that. We are the Greater Framingham Community Church. We're located 44 Franklin Street, Framingham. We're on that corner. And yes, this is who we are, what we are about. This is the articulation of our ministry. And we are full partners in this. I can remember one time the big discussion in community was, well, we don't have enough tax income coming in. And the churches and the nonprofits, they ought to be paying taxes. And I'm like, and you know, everybody write the letters to the editor and everybody else, churches. And I remember the little meeting I went to, and they were like, and there's this discussion with my colleagues around the table. All these pastors say, well, maybe we ought to give a donation. I said, excuse me, we're tax exempt. This ain't about how much money I bring at the table. This is about whether or not you represent the value of the church in this community. Are you kidding? And then I had to remind some vendors out there, if my folk didn't come to my church, guess what? They would not be going and frequenting buying gas at your gas station. Hear me now? They wouldn't be going spending money at your store. So this is not a case where we don't have value. No doubt about it. And guess what? What we do in ministry raises the level of quality of life in that community. You can't even put a value number on that one. So therefore, you have to look forward thinking. And in this particular case, made it very clear. Oh, I'm not giving up tax exempt status. Are you kidding? No way. My parishioners pay taxes. Remind folk, they pay taxes. Yes, they do. All right? And then they give money to this church because they believe in the ministry of this church and our impact in community. We're not going to double dip on them. And it's not just thinking for the immediate, but for the long term. The last thing I want to do is leave a legacy. The next person follow me in pastor ministry, and they're forking out money for taxes. One of the things you ought to be very careful and not get caught up is that the entity, our civic entities, doing things for the church. We pay our way. I don't need a headline saying, oh, well, over at that particular church, the city plows their parking lot. Oh, no. Not at all. I don't need that headline. All that does is allow people to take it and attack the ministry. Plow company, they plow my lot. I pay for my own. Trash, same way. So that I'm not asking them to do more for me because I'm at church. I ain't none of that stuff. Now, I'll be very clear with you. I made it very clear when it came to movement and buying the property and all of the headache of zoning boards and what's zoning and parking requirements and all those hoops that you got to jump through. And my attitude was, we as a church will honor what the requirements are, but you will not impose on us any additional ones because we are a church. So I'm not getting and looking for slacking up. I'm not looking for a back room, getting around something. I'm bringing integrity to what I do. But I also do so from a place of strength. We are a ministry. We are a church. We are value. I know my value. And if you hang around me long enough, you will understand our value as well, who we are and what we are about. So that means that you must do your homework. Not everything that's going on in community are you called to take it and be investing in. I don't. My attitude is, with what they're doing, it's got to line up with what my mission is as a church. And I have to have some degree of believing that there's integrity there with that particular group before I give them money, lend my name, show up, because showing up is right there, lending support. Not at all. And you do your homework so that you keep the scandals that happen left and right around us, keep them so that they do not hurt the witness of the church. And this day and age, any one of us can name a story that's hurting the witness of the church. And we cannot do that. God will hold us accountable for that kind of thing going on. This money thing, I know we spent a long time talking about it, and yet it's so important. Sometimes we take it and we say, I'm building a budget in the church, and how much money I give to a particular area of ministry is somehow representative of the value that I put on that ministry. I don't think that's true at all. I don't think we ought to go down that rabbit hole. Remember now, it is not all about whether I give a particular ministry, the church votes and gives them 10,000 or 5,000, that somehow I believe in that ministry with 10,000 more than I believe the ministry I give 5,000. There are other ways in which we support ministries that says this ministry and what they're doing is of value. Whether it is that we recognize what they're doing, whether you in leadership show up in their ministry events, whether you celebrate it, whether you speak about it from the pulpit, there are other ways in which you speak value into a particular ministry where you're saying the ministry is valued and it's not just whether or not they got 10,000 or 5,000 from the general budget of the church. Don't allow yourself to be pushed in that kind of scenario. That is not what it's about. If anything, your budgeting should follow what your priorities are for ministry. And a given season, a particular area of ministry may call for more money than another particular area. Some ministries, they don't do any fundraising. They operate, and it's all because the church, the general budget of the church supports that ministry. Other ministries, they may get some money from the church, but they expect that they will raise money to take it and do ministry and what they're doing. It really is how you set that up and understanding not only the monetary value, but one of the things we lose sight of is the people value. This day and age, the resource of people in ministry can be far more valuable than how many dollars that come into your ministry. Do you have ministry people who can do ministry? What's hindering them from doing ministry? That's far more resourceful. I couldn't begin whether I operate with a $500,000 budget. Well, that is not telling the whole story. Let's talk about the other story about all the volunteer hours of members of the church who do things on behalf of the church, both in the church and outside of the church, that I couldn't begin to count up their value. Don't sell that short. That is a part of the picture of who you are in ministry and what you're doing. And we ought to understand that, and that is where we're getting caught at today. We're coming out of COVID. We have people in leadership roles who are no longer in those roles now. They're not coming back to the role. I've done it for all this, I'm done. Well, these are people, these are individuals, and our ability to invest in them will speak volumes about where we say our values are and where our investment is. Also, some ministries get into the trap of saying, well, we only got a certain amount of money, we're going to give everybody the same amount of money. No, I don't think every ministry needs the same amount of money. That's a cheap way out of trying not to hurt anybody's feelings, and therefore, an easy way of giving out money. No, it has to tie up with what our mission is, what we say we want to accomplish this year, and put that money there behind that. And in that is that understanding. Inevitably, there are going to be disagreements. It comes with the territory. And yes, there's some truth to the adage is that where you put your money is where you put your value is. But remember, it's not all about money. So, finances, they are a challenge, but they're not a challenge that cannot be met. Bring integrity to it. Bring communication, open, consistent. Remind yourself, communication is about saying something, saying it again and again and again, and say it again. Don't rely on one means of communication. Some people are visual learners. They only by what they see. Others learn by audio and what they're doing. This day and age, we all are swamped by various means of people communicating to us. So be creative in thinking out of the box. How do we communicate this information? What have you. Lots of times, if people have questions, answer those questions. No doubt about it. This is not about a secrecy. This is God's money, and this is people who are giving money because they believe in the ministry and they're investing in it. And we need to have that open, honesty, what have you. Some ministries never do an audit. An audit is an outside entity that comes in and says, we want to audit your books and whether or not you are doing ministry and using your money in proper accounting procedures, what have you. And in most cases, some people will say, look, we as a church, we can't afford an audit. I mean, audits are expensive. They're financial reviews. They're less intrusive and they're cheaper. But I just want to say to you, that investment in the integrity of how you handle the money in the church is never, ever wasted. Invest in it. Sacrifice in it. Remember, people want to give to something that they believe they're making a difference and is going towards something that is moving forward. They want to give to a ship that's riding through the storm, making a difference. And some of the giving is not just financial. One of the things I've been struck with, even in COVID, we decided that there was a gap in community in terms of food. And between Friday and Tuesday, when the food banks were not open and people were hungry, I decided we'd do a grocery bag program. All right, I'm doing it not because I want to duplicate what's around me, but there's a gap. I want to meet that gap. And even in COVID, I've been so impressed with folk who want to volunteer time, come out to help package that food and even deliver the food. Folk who may not have a lot of money to give, but this is the way in which they want to give and feel good about it. You'll get it. in the conversation that takes place, and they'll say, I am so proud my church is doing this, because they feel connection to what the church is doing is an extension of who they are as the body of Christ. And they give of their time and faithfulness to come out and do it. That's what we're talking about. And that is a part of stewardship. That's this part of stewardship we don't really do a lot of talking about. It's not always nickels, dimes, pennies, dollars, but it's people, it's time, it's talents, it's gifts. It's all used to God's glory. Can you hear me now? Such are those questions that we ought to be asking in ministry and what we do. May God bless you in your using of ministry to God's glory.